Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And I was actually quite literally popping some popcorn in my microwave when I noticed that there were some class updates that are pretty popcorn worthy, to be honest. I wasn't expecting the amount of changes that came through here, and it's interesting the problems that they've addressed, and there were some concerns that I personally had as well, regardless of just even class balance, but an interesting approach overall in these changes. These are only specifically to PvP, so if you're worried about these affecting you in a dungeon, it's not going to, or in a raid, it's not going to. These are only in player versus player combat. Now, specifically for Unholy Death Knight, we have pretty much not seen any of them. We have not really seen many consistent damage-based specializations in the game at the moment. It's mostly about burst damage. Now, specifically where they've gone up in power is their Necrotic Strike. So Necrotic Strike was kind of laughably bad. So I'm wondering if 6% is going to be enough for it, because Necrotic Strike historically has been a very fearsome spell as a healer to deal with. It'll stack up a healing absorption that you need to power through. So potentially going to be having more impact now, being 6%, especially with health pools being upwards of 40,000. So this is a big change to their single target pressure. Then we have Virulent Plague and Virulent Eruption. I probably butchered the names on those, which are now no longer reduced by 10% while engaged with enemy players. So it's important to note that they have previously made changes to spells in PvP. I think mostly throughout Legion, but maybe even prior to that, and even through Battle for Azeroth, there are just these changes they made to spells in PvP that may not need to still be applied anymore because the game is different than it was then. A change to Death Knights in Legion at that time maybe made sense for Virulent Plague and their dots to be doing 10% less damage. But now, currently in the build, no longer makes sense. So going back and kind of retuning that, this means that your spread pressure, your single target pressure is going to be a little bit higher. Just a little bit. You still bring powerful cooldowns like Abomination for burst windows. So I am curious to see how this consistent pressure added into it is going to really work for Unholy Death Knights, especially playing with classes like Warriors and Windwalkers, maybe Ret Paladins. Will Unholy trump Frost? Because Frost is hitting really hard right now and brings solid burst damage. That's really where Unholy is going to have to compete. I'm not sure if this is enough for it to take that spot. You may see it more with Warriors, but I think Frost is likely still going to be the king position for Death Knight. Now moving to Hunters, Careful Aim, which is a talent on the first row. Basically, your aim shot does bonus damage to a target at high health. So instead of it only being 20% bonus damage, it's now 35% bonus damage. So 15% damage buff to aim shot on targets that are at high health. So this is going to add to your initial pop as a marksmanship hunter. But after that point, it's not going to have any more substantial pressure. It's just going to be your initial hit. So this may allow you to play with things like Feral Druid or Salty Rogue that focus on crowd controlling a healer and then hitting a target from full health to 0 really fast. That'll make you a little bit better in those positions. I'm not sure if this is enough to really make up for you being very stationary, your pet dying, and all the downsides that comes with Marksmanship Hunter. At the moment, I'm not sure that this is going to be really enough. You still see them on the ladder, and I'm more talking about tournament. I think on the ladder, this gives Unholy Death Knight, like I talked about, a better shot, and this will help you out a bit of it as marksmanship, but marksmanship in my mind is in a spot where it's either going to be absolutely bonkers, tapping people immediately like it was, or it's just not going to work. I think Marksmanship Hunter needed a little bit of love like Shadow Priest got, so maybe hopefully it'll get that in the future. Again, that's my own opinion. I don't know if anyone else shares that, but this is going to help you out with your burst damage at high health targets. Beast Mastery Hunter is getting a pretty substantial buff. Their Bestial Wrath was basically nerfed by 20% in players, and Bestial Wrath increases your damage by 50%. So now instead of it only increasing by 30, it increases by 50. And with the meta being about burst damage, I could see Beast Mastery Hunter pumping out some really big numbers. To me, this is a very notable change to a specialization that I was otherwise just kind of like counting out. I would have liked to have seen some of the honor talents buffed like in the past, and Dire Beast Hawk. I can't remember if I'm remembering exactly the circle on the ground honor talent that has a bird spinning around. They used to hit really hard in Legion, then I think it got a nerf, and then now I don't think the nerf is necessary. Same thing for Demonology Fell Lord. I really feel like these two specifically were kind of cool mechanics that not a lot of classes had. The circle with a unique animation that you needed to make sure you're trying to get out of. So I enjoyed like the outplay value of those abilities, and now they just feel useless. So I would have liked to have seen that. But as far as this is just a 20% damage buff on your cooldowns and an expansion about doing damage during cooldowns. This could have big implications to counter mages. So maybe we see Beast Cleave, Enhancement Shaman, Beast Mastery Hunter, purging down all the Triune wards and then just pumping out a ton of burst. This could bring Beast Cleave back potentially, and I've got my eyes on this one most notably. Mages, I'm glad that they targeted some of the counter mechanics to damage over time effects, because at the moment, mages in particular, having Triune Ward, giving them Prismatic Barrier, which reduces the duration of magic effects, having Dampened Magic to reduce dot damage by a further 20%, basically meant that mages were invulnerable to dots without really doing very much at all. So I think taking this approach to make them take a little bit more damage to dots is a nice approach. It's not going to break the class, right? It's still going to be pretty solid. I think mages are going to have more problems with the changes that are coming into Holy than specifically to them. As a Frost Mage, you're going to be pretty happy. Glacial Spike was a spell, again, probably in Legion, that got nerfed by 20% with players, so now it's no longer nerfed. It's going to basically just 20% damage buff to Glacial Spike, so maybe we see some really big Glacial Spike mages come back. Ray of Frost is now also no longer reduced by 15% when engaged with combat with enemy players. So two of your big maybe hitting abilities here. I haven't seen a lot of Glacial Spike builds, but this could have some interesting synergies. I'm going to have to pay attention, a little more close attention to some of the conduits for these specs as well. Maybe there's some conduits that are going to buff up Glacial Spike even further. So I'm curious to see where Frost comes out at the end of this. Remember, Frost has been getting some damage buffs over time as well, and it still brings really good crowd control to the table. So now they've got these heavy hitting attacks back. So this is going to be interesting for Frost Mages. Fire, Pyrokinesis is now only going to reduce combustion by 3, down from 5. So this is the honor talent where every fireball would reduce the cooldown by 5 seconds of combustion. Really powerful for you getting combustions in windows that you would otherwise not be able to get that, along with shifting power, reducing its cooldown, and a talent as well. So the synergy between all three of those is allowing you to get combustion really frequently. So targeting the cooldown reduction of combustion to try and make it so players can trade a little bit more evenly with it is likely to try and create a more fair gameplay with it. But it's still not going to reduce the power of combustion overall. However, maybe because mages generally counter mages by being able to use Kleptomania to remove combustion and cancel it, and I feel like Frost Mage's damage now likely outside of combustion is actually higher, maybe even substantially higher than Fire, bringing in the snares and control. We may see potential for Frost Mages playing with other casters like Balance Druid at the moment, maybe even Affliction Warlock now that Dampened Magic is reduced from other mages, and some changes we're about to see to Holy Paladin. Now Mistweaver, this is something I talked about in a video as well. Their Chrysalis PvP talent got nerfed in BFA when it made sense because there was an Azurite trait also reducing its cooldown, so it basically had no cooldown, and everyone was like, here's a life cocoon, you get a life cocoon. So now it's gone back to its original cooldown, reducing it by 40 seconds. It's still not going to really help you when you're just dead through life cocoon. I think that this is all right for a change, but then also this mana regeneration when engaged with combat with enemy players is a bit odd, because to me, I'm not really a fan of healers that just never have to drink and never So I'm very worried when they go to mana regeneration approaches. To me, monks needed something to deal with dying and stuns in particular. So anything to do with stuns, I would have much rather have seen that, because this has potential. Maybe it doesn't. Where are we going to see Mistweavers as a result of this? With mana regeneration increased in Life Cocoon, they're going to need to play with hybrids or casters, likely hybrid casters like Shadow Priest. So maybe Mistweaver. Is this going to really bring Mistweaver back into the meta? I think more or less than not, these changes won't impact Mistweaver so much as you're about to see the changes to Holy Paladin. So damage transferred through Ultimate Sacrifice is no longer affected by Blessing of Sacrifice's rank 2. This was a passive you got leveling up in Legion that it reduced the damage you took. So you sacrifice a target, that target gets hit, all that damage it takes goes to you. And then that damage was reduced by 35% on yourself. Now it's not. You're going to get the full value of that ultimate sacrifice. It's truly going to be an ultimate sacrifice now, which is going to encourage swapping to the Paladin during that. It's a powerful cooldown on the target that's immune, but switching to the Paladin is going to be a nice way to outplay that. I really like that approach to this change for Holy Paladin and creating more gameplay around that ability. It's really powerful, but a big drawback. I think that was a nice approach to this. And then decreasing their mana regeneration by 30%. I think it was getting obvious in tournament play that Paladins were really not spending mana. They're able to use Holy Power instead. They're able to use Divine Favor to reduce the cost of their spells, and they could generally avoid casting in all situations. And by having Beacon on 2 targets, they're always healing efficiently and getting their mana back into the Beacon. So just flat out targeting their mana regen and lowering it, I think was a good approach, because Paladins are bringing the highest throughput, the highest, most powerful cooldowns, a ton of damage, a lot of pros. So I think mana regeneration as a con makes sense, specifically here for Holy Paladin. And I think that this nerf to Paladin may more likely mean that Mistweaver becomes a dampener healer, which is what I'm really... I don't know if encouraging that is the best, because we saw that in BFA. Resto Druid was the dampener healer, then it got nerfed, and then Mistweaver was the dampener healer. And when it's just about healers that don't so they can just sit at the pillar forever and not drink and wait for the other healer that isn't playing their class that does need to drink to win, or to stop their drink and win, I don't think that's the most interesting gameplay. But again, there's a lot of burst damage buffs, and burst is already pretty high, and Mistweaver still bring the downside of being susceptible to dying and stun. So perhaps Mistweaver's as the healer that you swap targets to. You try and power their cooldowns, but they're really efficient on mana. So you see them in maybe some spell cleaves with Warlocks, Elemental Shamans. I would like to maybe see a Beast Cleave attempted here. What would be the best healer after all these changes for a Beast Cleave? It's probably still Paladin, because it just brings so much damage and instant crowd control, even with the mana reduction. I feel like Enhancement Shaman and potentially Beast Mastery Hunter could be a nice little counterplay to all of the mages that we're seeing at the moment. Mistweaver, this could likely be a good counter to Balance Druid, as they've historically been a pretty good healer into damage over time effects. So by having their mana regeneration bolstered up, they may be able to play out long games and play with like warriors and rep paladins, and maybe take the position of the priest in that comp or the shaman in that comp a little bit more frequently as a counter into Boomkin specifically. But you're still going to die in stuns. So while it is a buff, maybe you're going to see more play in rated battlegrounds by having more mana to be able to last longer in a fight. But in 3v3, a little bit tougher position. So overall, I think this is an interesting approach. I'm glad that they went and looked at some of the spells that had PvP-specific tuning that no longer made sense for the current iteration of the game. I think that was a good way of going about trying to rebalance the game. I think there's potential for Beast Mastery to come into play, Frost Mage to come into play, and all the other healers to have a better shot. Now that there's a little bit more outplay value against Holy Paladin, and their mana regeneration is lower. Downsides of these changes: Resto Shaman mana is still really good. I'm a bit worried about it. And Mistweaver mana regeneration. Now, Mistweaver, I'm curious if Mistweaver ends up being the most mana efficient healer. It would be the only pro to the specialization at the moment. So maybe it's fine. Maybe that's fine. I'm not trying to like down talk on the Mistweavers that are like, what did you say? Don't you dare tell them to not buff Mistweaver. Like, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to take like a overarching prediction of these changes. Still, it's quite a lot of changes to a lot of specs. I'm curious to see if Unholy fits anywhere with maybe Affliction Warlocks, spamming out the snares. Although that main problem is that Sacrilash Legendary basically replaces the Death Knight. So I think Unholy would be more likely to play with Warrior. It'd be interesting to see if we see Warrior Death Knights come back. I think Marksmanship probably got the least impact overall from all of this. Just a little extra damage at higher health, still a lot of the other downsides. BM still has the problem of their pet dying as well. Take that into account. But I played against one Beast Cleave. That's my data pool, one Beast Cleave. But I'm very curious to see what Beast Cleave feels like after these changes. Regardless, I hope this update was useful to you. If it was, please thumbs up the video, comment down below with your thoughts about these changes and what you'd like to see or what you're expecting to have happen or what you're looking forward to trying out here. I'm very glad that they are still actively making changes to Shadowlands, as I've been pretty content with the game overall. I still have some pretty big concerns about catch-up mechanics for alts, but I am very happy to see that changes are coming through to try and get some specializations that were kind of beaten into the mud back up to the surface, and make the game a little bit more diverse and interesting in terms of strategy and composition. So other than that, thank you very much for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one.